All right. Well, good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I know that apparently the general session upstairs ran a little late, so there's some people coming in. I'm Kenny Avery. I'm the CEO of Advanced Agrilytics. And today we're going to talk a little bit about our approach to agronomy and specifically to the farm itself. The title is Think Differently, which pulls off of the old Apple ad from a long time ago, but farming smarter. And we'll talk a little bit about our results and the value that we can create, not just in the U.S., but on a global basis. And then hopefully have some time for questions at the end. We are going to have two different polling sessions, so have your phone ready. You're going to need those. But normally when you make a speech about food and productivity and agriculture around the world, you're making it to a lot of people that are not as passionate about it as you are. Fortunately, today we're in a place where everybody in this room is passionate about feeding the world. There's a lot of different things that go into feeding the world. Clearly, we know that, but productivity is where we focus. There's, access to capital, there's cold storage, there's supply chain, there's all the other things that go in to food availability. But we're specifically talking about our method and our approach to productivity. Clearly, everybody agrees that there's going to be more people in the world, a billion, 1.2 billion in the next 25 to 30 years. But unfortunately, there's already 700 to 750 million people that are hungry every day. And there's 200 million people that are near starvation level. In today's world, it's just hard to fathom because most people in this room are not hungry. I would be willing to say they're not hungry today. You may have been hungry at some point in your life, but you're probably not hungry today, right? But it's how do we get food? How do we increase our productivity on farms? Because a lot of that hunger is based in Asia and Africa, where the almost billion plus people are scheduled to grow, right? And so you're just accelerating a problem on top of that. And that's why we believe we have to act now. We talk about 20, 25 years, but really 20 years is 20 growing seasons. We got 20 times to get this right? It's not 365 times 20. It's 20 growing seasons. So we have to start acting now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But inside of that, there's estimates of up to 15% of arable land will continue to be taken out of production. So not only do we have to feed a growing population, but we're probably going to have to do it with less land, or at least no more land than we currently have. So we have to be better from a productivity standpoint, from a farming stand, as we think about that. And so you'll hear some terms today, but our approach is what we call down to a sub-acre level, right? And a lot of people talk about a farm, and a farm in Vietnam may be one field, right? It may be a hectare and a half. In Iowa, it may be 40,000 acres. Right? So, but every farm is made up of a number of fields, and what we don't do, we treat every sub-acre specifically and understand what's going on in that particular area, and we apply our agronomy to that. And so Kes and John will talk more about that. But it's when we talk about sub-acre or spatial, that's what we're talking about, is getting down to a very small space and addressing each issue to get the highest level of productivity out of that field. We clearly know that around the world, not everybody has the same access to capital, to equipment that we have here in the United States or Brazil or other areas. But we do believe today every farmer, no matter where they're farming or what crop they're farming, should have access to the same level of knowledge. And certainly with technology today, that exists. And so what we deliver is not dependent on equipment. It's dependent on understanding that field and addressing the crops that are being grown there as well. The last thing I'll say before I introduce our panel here is really two things. You'll hear us use the word weatherproofing, right? Well, clearly we know we can't predict the weather, we can't control the weather, but what we can do in each and every farm and field that we interact with, we can prepare that field to adapt to the stress that's coming. And if we can be better about predicting the stress and knowing where that stress is going to be and how that's going to impact the plant, then we can help to weatherproof that acre. Because if you think about what we've been able to demonstrate, and you'll hear some more of the statistics, we can build bushels of yield over time, up to 30 bushels of yield over time on average over the last 10 years on our farms. But we also increase the resilience on that farm. And so what that means is the variability. We reduce variability by 30%, right, 23%. And what that does is that ensures that farm is going to be a stable output for each and every year, over and over and over. And then finally, we increase nutrient use efficiency, right? And so the nutrients that are being applied, because we're increasing yield, we're continuing to advance that farm. So we're giving them higher yields, better stability, and higher nutrient use efficiency, and we'll talk more about that. We've been doing this for, like I said, over 10 years. We have two of our co-founders on the panel today, Kes Berg and John Frigid. And we have Rachel Hurley from Payne Schwartz Partners, who is our principal investor at Advanced Agrilytics as well, and we'll be talking through these things today in more detail. And hopefully, again, we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, we'll have our first poll. Normally, you don't tell everybody to pull out their phone in a speaking engagement, but pull out your phone. I think everybody's used to this these days. All right. Wait one more minute. All right, so we've got, looks like 1.6. Food production will decrease over the next 20 years, so not everybody's agreeing about that. I believe that predictive agronomy is both high in both situations around crop resilience, so appreciate that. So let's get started. We talked about variability, and we talked about weatherproofing the acre and in my intro. But you know, the UN panel on climate change, they came out and said that a 1 degree Celsius change warmer impacts corn yields by 7% negatively, wheat yields by 6% negatively, and rice yields by 3% negatively, right? So everybody understands the variability in climate that's going on right now, right? And we know that places are getting water that haven't gotten it traditionally. There's droughts in areas that haven't had droughts in a long time. Temperatures are changing very dramatically in some cases, but overall, statistics say things are getting warmer. So we know the goal is to continue to stay ahead of that from a productivity standpoint, not only because there's going to be more people, but we just have to continue to increase the world food supply. And so with that, Kes, when you talk about variability, what does that mean to you?
Yes, and really talking about food security and variability. As we look at that, it is the assurance that a population has a food supply for the long-term vision or even their short-term vision. And Kenny spoke to that well. But what really is that supply? Well, one of the main issues, it is production, and it is that year-to-year production. If you talk to any grower on the planet, what will they relate it back to, the differences in production? Weather. What has the weather done? I think for us, we try to disentangle or get weather out of our production as much as possible. And how do you do that? You know, Kenny talked about really that proactive agronomy and predictive agronomy. How do you prepare the plant to withstand that difference? Weather is still going to happen. It really is. But how do we prepare? And again, talking to any grower on the planet, even a grower here in the state or multiple growers in the state, they'll all say it's different here. And it is. There are some weather differences, there are some topography differences, but there are key mechanisms that stay the same. And when I talk about mechanisms, photosynthesis, we all know that's a mechanism. Denitrification, that's a mechanism. Diffusion is another mechanism that really revolves around nutrient and efficiency. All those, just like gravity, happen the same way across the planet. We can start to predict that. With the data sets that we have and the tools that we have, such as terraframing, our internal tool, really we get to a place where not only that application, but that timing to build resilience. And I think it's that resilience that leads to the food security and decreases that variability that we talk about. How has the weather impacted us? We need to try to get that as far away from us as possible for that food security. But this greater predictability, it really means adjusting that crop and having greater agronomic control, not being at the mercy. And really, as you look at that, and I would ask Kip Tom, that is on the phone, to provide some context, the predictability not only on his own farm in Indiana and that production system, but as ambassador, really to look at what, or to give us context around what does that mean for the planet. Kip?
Well, it's an honor to be with you this afternoon in Des Moines, Iowa. Thanks, Kes, for having me on. One of the things that I would say here, the predictability for the U.S. farmer or anyone in a developed economy is that we need predictability for, lenders, our equipment manufacturers we deal with the suppliers on our input supply chain that, brings the products to us that we use on our farm. We need to know need to have consistency. And without that consistency, these input suppliers, whether it's a lender, whether it's a farm equipment manufacturer, whether it's a input supplier of chemistries or seed products, it's hard for them to invest in the future, to bring new innovations to the marketplace. So being on this journey with you, Kes, since about 2009, I know what advanced agrilytics brings in doing this, this analysis of our farms and the way we use Terraform to build the maps that really, and build the systems that we can manage our farm through improved seeding placement, seeding populations, fertilizer usage, everything. And to me, I have a unique lens. I had the opportunity to serve in Rome, Italy, working around the world with a lot of subsistence farmers. And I know that, the only way for them to improve their crop productivity, to feed themselves on a daily basis almost as a subsistence farmers, they have to have new tools too. So I think a tool like this brings a lot of potential to draw people back in to understand that farming is a business and to get back in improving that food security system. Let's face it, food systems are going to continue to grow over the next 20 years, but my ultimate belief is that over time, because of the demand for protein, even when they talk about a population curve starting to turn down after 2050, I believe that protein consumption will continue to increase, and the way we use sustainable intensification on our farms will be even more important. So using tools like this is going to be what we're going to have to do to make sure that we can feed that hungry world.
Thanks, Kip. And the most important people I had to introduce, our customer for 14 years, I failed to introduce Kip. So we're thankful to have Kip. He couldn't join us here, but he is remotely, obviously. And he brings a unique perspective as being one of our customers, but also being in ag around the world and being involved with it. So we talked a little bit about working to minimize variability and how that benefits the growers. Now we're going to show you some actual real live results. So, Kes?
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. And something that we really want to be able to, and are happy to show. And Kip has talked about the 14-year journey that he and I have been on personally, but really talking about our system as a whole. These are actual results. This is not generated or a thought of what we're going to do in the future. As Advanced Agrilytics, we love to talk about the distribution of yield. And so in both these graphs, yield is on the X, and then the probability density is on the Y. And so as you think about that and look at the distribution, each and every place that we really want to have impact, we're trying to decrease that variability or decrease that distribution and shift it to the right. And so we have two different groups here. Prior to AA and AA management. And what we've done, this is approximately 1.2 million acres to 1.5 million acres, depending on the crops. But looking at that, we took each one of our individual growers and the 3 years prior to really being our customer, that is the prior to AA line or the red line in both graphs. Now, the green line is following that AA or those AA management techniques. As you can see, what we're trying to accomplish and is coming true is narrowing that distribution and shifting it to the right. Now, what does this truly mean? We focus on that left-hand tail. Absolutely focus. We've spoken a little bit about that weather impact. That left-hand tail is the one that shifts the most in almost every production system. If it's a dry year, it will be in the left-hand tail. If it's a wet year, it will be in the left-hand tail. And where have we focused? What have we done? It's taken it specifically on corn, 30 bushels off that left-hand tail, building consistency. To break that down even more and to get a little bit more focus, we're going to speak on two differing farms. Kip is on the phone, and Tom Farms is one of those in that northeast Indiana, north central Indiana area. And then we're going to talk about Snai Farms over on the Mississippi River. These aren't worlds apart, they're just a state apart, but they're much different. This grouping constitutes about 33 to 35,000 acres in the analysis that we're going to present. But as you look at these two differing operations, and I'll call the attention to some of the growing season characteristics, but I also want to talk about mineralogy of that soil. Kip and Tom Farms, they have a lot of sand. They do have some clay, and they do have some ground that really is higher organic matter. But when you go to Snai Farms, it's a lot of that ancient river bottom ground because it's so close to the Mississippi. Heavy, heavy clay, some roll, but not any sand. So as those two growers would talk together, they would also say, things don't work here because it's different. And the climate is a little bit different. As you look at this, and specifically the solar radiation looks fairly similar. The precipitation, fairly similar, just a little bit of difference there on that May to September. But then you start to look at evapotranspiration, or the water that the plant is passing through it to cool. That evapotranspiration is higher for Snai Farms, being a little bit more south. And then that temperature or that time that's greater than 86 degrees. That's where the separation. When you think about Snai Farms, it's really about that early season growth, trying to limit that evaporation, what's being lost just the ambient, and making sure the water or the rainfall that we receive passes through the plant. Similar production systems, but differing management. And so some of the results, and looking at that specifically, and across the X, we have year of advanced agrolytic management, and then that yield across the Y, and the dotted line is the coefficient of variance. This is Snai Farms. You can see in year 0, 1, and 2, their yield moves with the county. That orange line is the Nass County yield. And even as you look at year 4, 5, and 6, very similar. Obviously above, a little dip in 6, but from 6 on to essentially last year, their impact, their influence on that crop is separating from the county influence, separating from the weather, and you can see that. Looking at that a little bit differently, we have CV on the Y, year of management on the X, and then on the right-hand Y, that weather contribution. The weather contribution is in that, or on those orange bars. You can see that impact in years 0, 1, and 2. Just like the county moved with that, here it's moving, or that weather impact is moving that yield. As you look at year 5, 6, 7, those weather impacts are differing from one year to the next, but we keep decreasing the CV, decreasing that variability every single year. Moving to Tom Farms, a different geography. It's a little bit more tracking with that county average. And you can see the CV hasn't decreased as much, but really looking specifically at the yield gain on the Nass County. You can see in year 0, it was approximately 175. By year 10, that county average was about, I'm going to say 190. So you've got a 15 bushel difference. You know, as we look at that and think about even the hybrid industry, they would claim 1.8 to 1.9 bushels for that genetic improvement every year. And you can see that in the county. With Tom Farms, going from 210 to approximately 235 or 240, we're exceeding that. You're starting to disentangle or separate from just that county or that weather impact. And so the variability, and again, looking at that CV, and decreasing that CV and separating from those weather conditions. Thinking through that specifically, even in those last 4 years, even if the weather impact is higher or in the lower in that last one, we're keeping a consistent CV. Making sure that we produce the bushels that we think we're going to produce every single year. And to look at that a little bit differently, and this is on the X is still that year of AA management, but on the Y is water use efficiency in bushels produced per inch of rainfall. You can see the two different farms, Tom Farms in orange, Snai Farms in green, and then what that trend line is. In that year 0, right there around 10 bushels produced per inch of rainfall. Now look at it in the last 4 years. From year 8 to year 11, we're approaching that, well, I'm going to say 13.5 to 14 bushels raised per inch of rainfall. We all know that our climate is changing. We all talk about really inconsistency of rainfall, longer periods without rainfall. How do we keep producing bushels? How do we find resilience? And I think this shows it well. I think the other thing that we can see, improvement is not slowing. Even in our program, year 10, year 11, we keep improving not only yield, but also the bushels raised per inch of rainfall received. So Kip, as we think about that, how is that impacting your program, your farm, and what is the value of that to, I'm just going to say, the grower across the planet?
Well, you know, as this audience watches this presentation, I think it's very obvious to them how it benefits farms like us in the United States who have a system where all of our equipment, let's face it, the technologies we have available to us today, there is no reason not to use products like this to make sure that we have productivity. We're in a commodity business. And the only way we stay in business in that is if we're high in, I mean, if we produce the maximum capacity of our farms, we're climate resilient, we lower cost, and we do that a lot of times, obviously, with your systems of how we manage fertilizer. We're making sure we get the most out of every pound of fertilizer, most out of every drop of water we use. That affects us a lot. Now, I go to a developing country. I just came back from Kenya a few weeks ago, and they're just hoping they get access to new technologies like some of the genetic improvements have been made that allows them to use some of the GMO products that we have in the United States. And I know there's other countries looking as well. But you layer that on top of products or a service like this or a tool like this, I should put it that way, I think we can continue to see that productivity. It's going to take a different shape. Let's face it, there's no question that farmers in sub-Saharan Africa don't have the access to all the technologies. But at the same time, Kes, you've been with me in Sudan and you've witnessed some large operations there. There's others like that across Africa that can actually have an impact on food security around the world. Let's face it, Africa has nearly 10 times the amount of arable land in the United States. Let's make sure we give those producers an opportunity to produce and help feed themselves. And I think it'd be better for everybody if we can see that kind of productivity gain. So back home in Indiana, we'll continue to use this product. We know what it delivers for us. But again, I'm an optimist. I believe even after the year 2050, as we continue to decline on population, that our demand for protein is going to continue to accelerate. And the only way we address that through whether we're trying to feed biofermentation plants or biofuels or whatever it may be is through using tools like this to make sure we get the most. And like I said, we are the solution for climate change, as many people talk about, or the climate shocks that we're experiencing. So I believe in the products that we're using from you or the tool we're using from you of the way we manage our nitrogen. We've seen us go from 1.25 pounds down to almost 0.75, 0.8 pounds of nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. There isn't hardly any way we can do that in any other system or any other product or any other tool to actually improve that food or that productivity. So again, to me, this is revolutionary, and I'd like to see it adopted in many more places.
Thank you, Kip. I think the other thing that we don't want to lose sight of is and I've had the chance to travel around the globe, not as much in Africa, but it's easy to talk about farming in Iowa, again, with all the resources we have. But when you get into areas where, you have communities and that are dependent on the performance of those farms, food supplies dependent on that. When you start talking about increasing bushel yields by 10, 15, 20, 30%, that's life-changing to that farmer, no matter how much acres or hectares she's farming, but it's also changing to that community as well. And so we think it's the productivity essentially raises all ships as well around the globe, and that's what gets us very excited about this. So we talked a little bit about what we have done, John. So as you think about technology, and that everybody that makes a speech these days has to use the word AI, so we sound intelligent. But as you think about all the tools that are available to us today, including AI, what's the future? What's next?
Yeah, certainly, Kenny. There's AI is going to be a big component of that, and we're seeing that really across the board. I mean, starting with our data scientists and engineers, how they utilize that technology in the development of their code and algorithms. It's greatly enhanced their efficiency in which they're able to deliver things in a certain time frame. But also in the tools for agronomists, summarizing all the data that we collect. Cass and Kenny both referred to, sub-acre management. We're collecting data on a small hexagrid that in a 1 acre area, you have 70 of these hexagrids. So on a 100-acre field, you have 7,000 hexagrids, and that serves as the basis for all our data. So using AI to help summarize those things, interpret the data, the visualizations, the results to help drive decisions, I think is going to be important. But then, also building that knowledge base. The AI is only as good as the underlying knowledge base that's feeding it. And if you don't have a good knowledge base there, you're probably not going to get a good outcome with your AI models.
Thanks. So Rachel, when you think about technology and scalability, what comes to mind to you?
Yeah, I think scaling is critical for feeding a growing population. We really need to get more out of what we already have. That sustainable intensification concept that Kit mentioned earlier. And Advanced Agrilytics helps growers do that. That's why Paine Schwartz Partners invested in 2019. We're a dedicated sustainable food and agriculture investor, and we seek to feed a growing population better food using more efficient use of resources, and that is Advanced Agrilytics in a nutshell. We do that by partnering with our management teams to grow both the sort of business, but also the impact. And we do that not only through capital, but also through expertise that allows us to add something unique from an impact perspective. We have, the traditional value creation levers like mergers and acquisitions, but we also have dedicated expertise around research and development and sustainability. You can see from this slide how much Advanced Agrilytics has scaled since the Paine Schwartz investment in 2019 at 693,000 hectares now. But on the other side of the slide, you can see that there are so many hectares globally that could benefit from tools like the Advanced Agrilytics tools. And I know you all have done really an incredible analysis to show how beneficial that can actually be.
Thank you, Rachel. So this morning we launched or we released a white paper on NUE, which we're going to go into a much deeper dive on. But essentially, John and his team have analyzed for the last 3 years, for 22 to 24, about our impact on 750,000 acres of farmland that is managed by us, and really discussing what that impact has had, not only on the farmer, but also on, from a sustainability standpoint and an environmental standpoint. So, John, you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, sure, Kenny. As you think about nitrogen and, well, really any nutrient and the efficient utilization of that nutrient, especially with the prices where they're at today, you want to try to get the most bang for your investment dollar there. So looking at nitrogen use efficiency, and if you're not familiar, that's pounds of nitrogen required to raise a bushel of grain. And if you look at least in the U.S., kind of the industry standard that you see from universities and other publications is 1 to 1.2 pounds of N to raise a bushel. The data that Kenny referenced here that our team has been working on over the last 3 years with our growers, we are at a nitrogen use efficiency of 0.75 pounds of N per bushel. So that's a significant improvement in the nitrogen use efficiency versus what would be kind of considered that standard, if you will. We've also done some analysis with that data to really try to understand, okay, if the nitrogen use efficiency declines, and by declines I mean you're not as efficient with your nutrient utilization. You know, how does that impact revenue? How does that impact yield? Those sorts of things. And one of the things that we found was if the nitrogen use efficiency goes from 0.75 to say 0.9, we found in our data set, you're going to realize about an $80 an acre revenue loss, either due to a combination of lower yields, higher input costs, or yield penalties due to denitrification, those sorts of things, from not effectively managing that nitrogen. And really, I mean, we talk about nitrogen, but all the other primary nutrients that the crop needs to grow are also playing a role here. By getting those things right, these things are all synergistic, and I think they all contribute to that higher nitrogen use efficiency. So when you think about that, what that adds up to over that 750,000 acres, if that nitrogen had not been managed in an efficient way, you would be looking at about $60 million in lost revenue over that time had we not been managing that nitrogen in a spatial manner, also incorporating stabilizers and also utilizing other management techniques for nutrients like phosphorus and potassium. You know, we talk a lot about agronomy, but and Payne Schwartz really has a strong emphasis on the sustainability component as well. And that's, as you've heard Kip and Kenny and Kes and Rachel talk here this afternoon, that's only going to be more important going forward. And so one of the things we look to understand with our growers, you know, we had all this data around nitrogen use efficiency and these other metrics, was what is our impact in terms of a carbon intensity score? So we obtained a copy of the GREET model from the University of Illinois Chicago, and I specifically thank Stefan Mueller for providing that to us, and ran these growers' information through that GREET model to determine what the CI scores were. And compared to a baseline CI score, we were 23.5% lower in our carbon intensity, and also 20.6% lower in terms of nitrous oxide emissions. So, you know, a substantial improvement there. But how that really translates when you think about equivalencies, that's where it gets to be these really compelling numbers. You know, that translates into 26 million gallons of diesel fuel, or removing 63,000 gas-powered vehicles from the road, or the equivalent of the carbon removed by 4.5 million trees grown over 10 years. So all those things really add up to be a substantial improvement, you know, not just for the growers that we work with in terms of their efficiency of dollar invested for their inputs, but also we're seeing some nice benefit there to the environment. And so, you know, with that, I'd turn to Rachel and say, you know, with those types of reductions in emissions, tell us about how that would present from a case for investment and importance to a firm like Payne Schwartz.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these numbers are just so impressive. We often talk at Payne Schwartz about the sort of cyclical impact of climate change on food and agriculture, that food and agriculture disproportionately contributes to climate change, and it is also, food and agriculture is also disproportionately impacted by climate change. And so, you know, what Advanced Agrilytics has been able to do with their growers is addressing that on both sides. And in particular, you know, nitrous oxide is the #1 greenhouse gas, you know, contributor in row crop agriculture. So these numbers represent real world decarbonization of the food value chain, and you can just imagine what that would mean from a scale perspective. And so I'll give you another equivalency that I found recently, which is that if you wanted to offset the amount of GHG emissions that were represented by those numbers that you just saw, you would need about 1,500 acres of solar panels. So these are really big numbers, really impressive numbers, and it's happening while also supporting growers in increasing their yield and improving, you know, their resilience to our increasingly unpredictable weather. By the way, nutrient use efficiency, nitrogen use efficiency in particular, also has other harder to quantify benefits from an environmental perspective too, right? So reduced water or runoff into water and eutrophication, better air quality, better soil biodiversity, and soil is our most biodiverse ecosystem. And so this just really shows that capital behind soil health, putting capital behind soil health, behind resilience, behind grower livelihoods is not only a good investment financially, but it's also a good investment for the planet. And we really need that investment. There's a really massive gap from an investment perspective around sustainable food and agriculture. So there's a graphic up on the slide, you know, based on a study that says about $28 billion is being invested annually in sustainable food and agriculture, and we need more like $1 trillion annually in order to both feed a growing population and mitigate and adapt to climate change. And this is actually particularly prevalent in private equity or private investing like what we do. Only 2.5% of buyout capital went to food and agriculture of any kind in 2024. And, you know, as the largest dedicated sustainable food and agriculture private equity firm in the world, we've deployed $6.5 billion over 20 years, but that's a drop in the bucket relative to what needs to happen and how much more investment we need. So we're really hoping to see more players like us in the space, but we also think these demonstrated impacts should also interest any impact investor that's interested in, you know, solving hunger, addressing the climate crisis, or addressing income inequality as well.
Thank you, Rachel. You know, a lot of times when you talk to farmers, farmers believe sustainability is an or question, right? I can be profitable or I can be sustainable. And, you know, as we think about that farm, you think about, as we talked about water utilization, 75% of all the fresh water used in the world is used in agriculture, right? And so the demand for water, especially where water is going to be and over the next, you know, 25 years as well, you know, we've got to be efficient with every single input that we use to make sure that we're having the highest impact to that farm and we're having the highest impact to the environment as well. So we'll pull up the polling question again and ask you to retake it, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions if there are any. We'd be glad to take them from polling perspective, from the floor. Okay. All right, so A little bit movement on the bottom for sure. But pretty consistent, a little bit movement on the top. Before we go to questions, I mean, clearly we did not invent precision agriculture or precision agronomy. Everybody knows that. We've invested over $25 million over the last 10 years to build out and have 20 proprietary patents to our approach. And so we have invented around the space. We continue to invent around the space. We are very passionate about this being our approach being spread throughout the world. We stood up a licensing platform to license our methodology last year in September. As of this morning, we have 25 licensees in the last year, so fantastic progress in that. But that's really, as we think about how to scale this, it'll be providing access to knowledge and licensing this technology to anybody in the world that is willing and able to do so. So with that, questions? In theory, yes. I can hear you, but I don't know.
Thank you, guys. Christian Mann, Newman Natural Capital. We work with about 100 in the U.S., mostly on cash leases. Let me just preface this by saying I think that precision agriculture, this feels like the future. So they're not coming from a critical place at all. But I do want to push you a little bit because I haven't heard you talk about the unit economics with this very much. And we talked around it a little bit. We have some tenants that use advanced agrilytics. And I think the general sentiment is this is cool, it can work, it's expensive though. And for farmers who are using cash leases, it needs to work in the first season. It doesn't matter if it works in the 10th season if you don't own land because the business model needs to work year to year. So definitely not being critical, but would be interested to hear what your experience has been with the unit economics.
Well, I think because we typically look over a 3 to 5 year period, but it depends on the field. Oh, sorry. It depends on the field, obviously. Somebody that has a well-managed field, what we call delta to critical level, which is the amount of nutrients, because this conference is about soil. It starts in the soil. The foundation is what's in the soil and getting that right. Because it's just like building a house. You can't build off a poor soil, a poor foundation. So we take a kind of a 3 to 5 year look at that. Our typical model is expensive, right? But our historical model comes with an agronomist that comes on that farm and spends time with you. As we think about licensing, the thing about licensing is it's not dependent on an agronomist being on that farm. And so there is a different price point for that, for farmers to apply that. That helps the unit economics. But if you think over a 5 year period, on average, we're building 30 bushels of corn if you're growing corn. And the economics of that, even at $4, the ROI is 8 to 1, right? So it's a very high ROI. But we say that it's a program, and you got to follow that program over a period of time. So we don't try to save year one. We don't try to save somebody into prosperity. But our responses are typically very positive in that first year, but you're not going to get 30 bushels in that first year.
You gave us a couple of chemical and physical metrics in your presentation. Are you currently or are you planning to build in biological metrics?
Biological measurements.
Am I on? So the answer is yes. And when you think about even the biological metrics, whether it is, soil or mineralogy or mineralization of organic matter, today we measure that and actually predict that out. And that's one piece that makes our nitrogen use efficiency so good, because we understand what that mineralogy is and what that population is. I think there's other pieces. And as you look at that microbial population and even the fungal population, how do we address those? Our typical, and I'll turn to soybeans today, the impact that we're having on soybeans of our soil-borne diseases are so much greater than what we know. Or maybe not what we know, what we take into account. And so understanding that and being able to address that, I think are key pieces going into the future. And the spatial aspect of that is key because it only happens on so many acres.
I've been over here, so I'll go over there. Oh, all good. That's all right, Sally.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. Catherine Leafstead with EY Parthenon Strategy. My question is, when you're looking at this space of being an advisor, it's really quite crowded for farmers between retailers, crop consultants, ag input companies. How do you break through the noise and really differentiate yourself? And then a second part is, are you thinking about going beyond insights or recommendations to something like outcome-based business models, nitrogen credits, risk management tools, other things like that? Thank you.
Yeah, so it is a very crowded marketplace, right? One of the things that separates us is we're product agnostic, right? We don't recommend, if we do recommend a product, it's because we've tested it, we've tried it, and we know it. We don't get paid to recommend products. Retailers are in the business of selling products, right? And they have positions and warehouses and all the other things. And there's been a lot of studies out there about who does a farmer trust, right? And there's a lot of information. In fact, if you buy a farming magazine, every page is, if you just buy our product, you get another 6 bushels of yield, right? If you stacked all those on top of each other, you know, that's impossible. And so we believe that maintaining our independence separates us because, you know, we're not there to push a product, we're there to sell a process and an approach to that farm as we look at it. And our farmers, you know, we have about a 92% customer retention ratio, so over a 10-year period. So we feel pretty good that we're delivering that long-term value in doing so. And that's the feedback that we've gotten is stay independent of products and focus on how to improve our farm as well. To your second question, we're always, you know, we look at how to help a farmer maximize a profit on every acre. That's what we're trying to do. And whether it's a nitrogen credit program, a carbon program, whatever programs are out there, because a lot of the, especially in the United States, the government programs that are out there, our farmers are doing a lot of them already, right? And especially with nitrogen management practices and things like that, if they're following our program, they're already almost 95% available and ready for those programs. But we're always looking at that acre and how we can maximize the profitability on that, whether it's the output of the bushels, but on the inputs, and then any other things that they can qualify for.
You spoke about how many different data points you collect on each acre, and it was a huge number.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but it was impressed me as very large. How do you collect that data on all those data points, and what factors, for example, are you measuring?
So the big ones are yield, obviously, via the harvesting systems. We also collect soil test data. Our growers we soil sample every 3 to 4 years on those acres, and that is ingested as well. Topography data, you know, the elevation and then derivatives thereof, those are things that get utilized. But then going back and getting all the as-applied information, you know, how many seeds were actually planted, what was the variety or hybrid that was actually planted, that is tracked as well. And there are a number of other parameters that we're working on getting into the system. I think the other thing that and Kes can speak to as well, you know, we also like to, you know, he talked about mechanism, and we like to create layers that describe mechanism. So we've got a number of proprietary layers that we've created that are also stored on these small hexagrids that quantify things like nitrogen loss potential, things like that. So these are just a few examples of some of the data that we collect.
Yeah, I'm just picking up on the conversation around data collection, and I was really curious, as you're reporting your NUE increases, are you actually doing a comparison and looking at how your system compares to just a simple reduction of 5 or 10% in nitrogen application? How would that compare from a nitrogen use efficiency rating?
So the way we went about looking at that was, and again, there's a distribution there, right? Of, if you think of an 80-acre field, there may be a 0.5 to 1.3 range in nitrogen use efficiency there. We stuck with that kind of industry standard of 1 to 1.2 as the benchmark, if you will, and then compared against that. But then, layering in our recommendations for spatial nitrogen application, spatial application of stabilizers, and all these things to really get to that lower nitrogen use efficiency and provide that benefit to the grower.
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard to get farmers in the United States to use less nitrogen, right? I used to run a business where we sold nitrogen stabilizers, right? And 50% of all nitrogen applied never ends up in the plant, right? And so stabilizing it, in theory, every farmer should do it, but trust me, on the sell side of it, not such an easy sell, right? And so as we think about nitrogen applied, it's where it's being applied, when it's being applied, and how it's being applied really drives our approach to it. Not necessarily reducing it, but what you then get is more out of it. Eventually, you can get to a reduction standpoint when you get to a stable place, but every year is a different year. So, it is a great question.
Excuse me. Thank you. Hi, I have a question about the data that goes into your modeling. So, how do you factor in management practices or things like tile drainage? So if somebody is tiled, not tiled, they have cover crops, they don't, they till, they don't, strip till, how does that all factor into your calculations?
Well, you said the word tile, and that's near and dear to Kess's heart, so I'll let Kess answer.
It is near and dear to my heart. I love to talk about tile, but let's just talk about the other, I'm going to say distribution of the data set. Sure, inside of that, not only is there conventional till, but minimal till, strip till, and no till. Conventional would be the highest. The next would be strip till, or minimal till, then strip till. Those would compete. And in our data set, it'd be a smaller percentage that is absolute year after year after year no till. Now, with that being said, and really coming back to your question, the other thing about our data set and the NUE numbers of that 750,000 acres is 250 to 300 of those are corn after corn. So let's talk about, John said the industry standard of 1 to 1.1. What is it on corn after corn? 1.2, 1.4? That's what the industry standard would be there. And that's also incorporated in that number. And so thinking about that, how do you get to that? And again, Kenny talked about it just a minute ago. We talk about application rate, placement, timing. How do you understand what your risks are? And that's what that, I'm going to say predictive agronomy really addresses. It's the timing as well. And so now let's take the next 45 minutes and talk about tile. It's really interesting. And again, just coming back to, this tile aspect, I'm a farmer. You ask me if I'm tiled. And I say yes. What does that mean? Does that mean I've got one stringer running through this 80 acres that John talks about? Or am I pattern tiled? We didn't know, and we weren't going to get these maps. You weren't going to get those maps. I mean, how many of them happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when they weren't digitized? And so thinking about that, we had to create a methodology to understand, does water run to an area and does it get away or does it stay saturated? One thing about Kips that I didn't mention was you can make a huge mistake there. He's got a nice layer of, I'm going to say the A horizon of good soil, and then it gets very skeletal after that. It doesn't have a lot of nitrogen loss in terms, maybe some more leaching than denitrification. And so understanding those particular factors are really important. Now, everybody has access to topography, and this comes back to your question around data and data collection. we are very, very lucky to have the LiDAR access that we have. And LiDAR can tell you where water runs. It doesn't tell you where water saturates. And so in John's conversation around how do you create layers, we create a layer. We have a specific layer that will tell you whether water saturates or not. And specifically, it doesn't make us any difference if it's a granular subhorizon or if it's subsurface tiled. We understand what that water balance is. And really, if there's anything else that you take away here, spatial ag in general. We talk about seeding rate, application of nutrient, things of that nature. Our business revolves around water. Where does water run from? Where does water run to? And where it saturates. That's what makes us different.
And we don't sell tile, but Kess is currently, is very
But we
passionate about
do buy, well, some of us
buy
in the room
tile.
buy tile.
One last question. Go ahead.
Yes, so my name's Nick Blumenthal with the World Food Prize, just kind of the board. So I appreciate, kind of over the course of this conversation, we've heard a lot about, what the market size is for this sort of technology, what the opportunity is for this to be spread, maybe even beyond, corn and soybeans to all sorts of crops all over the world. And as you mentioned, kind of with this expansion, the different licensing that you've put out, and a lot of these opportunities, both that Kip mentioned and was previously mentioned, in terms of Sudan and visiting these other places that could benefit as well. And over lunch, we had a different conversation with the African ministers of agriculture talking about, they're very open to investment and bringing in the private sector and creating that sort of enabling environment. And so I'm curious, from your perspective of having a technology that's been proven to work, very well in the United States, what are some of maybe the challenges or what are things that you'd be looking for in order to expand this type of technology into whether it's Sierra Leone or Ghana or these other places around the world that are, more subsistence type farms, but then also ones that could very much benefit just as well and, reap the same sort of economic and environmental benefits that we're seeing here in the United States already?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. First, it's going to take partnerships, right? I mean, we're a company headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's going to take partnerships to get us to go around the world to be able to scale this business properly. We're very interested in talking to anybody, anytime, anywhere, to do that. But that's ultimately what it's going to take because we don't know. We can learn a lot about the knowledge and share a lot of knowledge about what's going on that farm, but we don't know the inroads in those governments. And we're a small organization, so we're not going to be able to scale it. I spent 10 years at Monsanto. Monsanto, we probably would have already done this 20 times. But the reality is it's going to take, for us to be able to do it, we're going to need partnerships. So, well, look, we appreciate you spending an hour or so with us this afternoon. We appreciate your attendance here at the Borlaug event because obviously it's critical as we think because we truly have 20 seasons to get this right, not 20 times 365. We got 20 chances. So I look forward to extending the discussion. Anybody will be up here for a little while if you have any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
The QR code on the screen is going to take you to where you can download the white paper.